At first, it seemed like a minor inconvenience. My mailbox occasionally tilted, knocked over, or slightly dented. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was the wind, maybe a stray dog had bumped into it, or maybe a careless teenager had misjudged their turn while riding a bike. But as the days passed and it kept happening, again and again, almost on a schedule, a nagging feeling started to settle in my chest. Something wasn't right. At first, I tried to be rational. I told myself it was nothing more than a string of unfortunate accidents. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the suspicion that there was something deliberate about it. Who would even bother messing with a mailbox? And why mine? My logical side told me to ignore it, to brush it off as paranoia, but my curiosity had already taken hold. So I decided to find out the truth. I installed a security camera outside my house, not specifically for the mailbox, but as a general precaution, since the neighborhood had been experiencing minor thefts. Still, in the back of my mind, I wondered if I might finally get an answer to the mystery. The first night after setting up the camera, I checked the footage, expecting to see nothing out of the ordinary. What I found instead left me speechless. There she was, Karen, my middle-aged neighbor, creeping onto my property in the dead of night like some cartoonish villain. She wore a flowery robe, her messy hair wild in the dim glow of her flashlight. She moved cautiously, looking left and right, as if making sure no one was watching. Then, with the determination of someone embarking on a life-or-death mission, she lifted her foot in. Bam! She kicked my mailbox with all the force her body could muster. The impact sent it wobbling, tilting dangerously before finally crashing to the ground. Karen stood there for a moment, staring at her handiwork as if admiring a masterpiece. Then, without a shred of guilt, she turned on her heel and strolled back toward her house as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process what I had just witnessed. A grown woman, my neighbor, had been sneaking onto my property at night just to destroy my mailbox. For what? Out of spite? Some bizarre grudge? The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was personal. I could have confronted her immediately. I could have marched to her house, footage in hand, demanding an explanation. I could have called the police, filed a complaint, or even set up a booby trap just to see her reaction. But no, something inside me stopped me. I wanted to see just how far she would go. The next morning, without a word, I reinstalled my mailbox as if nothing had happened. I secured it properly, stepped back, and admired my work. Then, I waited. And just as I suspected, Karen struck again. This time, she didn't kick it. Maybe her foot still hurt from the previous night's assault. Instead, she simply shoved the mailbox with her hands, watching as it tilted slightly before she walked away, satisfied. The ease with which she carried out this act, as if it were part of her morning routine, sent a mix of amusement and annoyance coursing through me. This wasn't just a petty prank. This was an obsession. And if Karen wanted a war over a mailbox, then I was more than ready to give her one. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional creak of a chair. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, as if everyone present could sense that something significant was about to unfold. At the defendant's table, Daniel Carter sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white. His face was carefully neutral, but the slight tension in his jaw, the occasional flicker of his gaze, betrayed the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. For weeks, Daniel had vehemently denied all accusations against him. He had presented himself as a victim of circumstance, a man falsely accused and unfairly targeted. His defense had been built on technicalities, on doubt, on the lack of direct evidence that could place him at the scene of the crime beyond reasonable uncertainty. And for a time, it seemed as though his carefully constructed facade might hold. But then, the prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she said, her voice steady but laced with quiet confidence, "the defense has maintained that there is no conclusive proof tying the defendant to the crime. That changes today. What I am about to present is undeniable evidence, proof that will leave no room for doubt. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Daniel's lawyer shifted slightly, casting a wary glance at his client, but Daniel remained still, his fingers curling slightly against the polished surface of the table. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the large screen at the front of the room flickered to life. The video was grainy, captured by a security camera, but the figure in it was unmistakable. The timestamp on the footage was clear, it placed Daniel at the victim's home at precisely the time of the crime. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the recording played. There he was, Daniel Carter, standing at the victim's doorstep. The camera caught the hesitation in his movements, the way his hand hovered over the doorknob before finally turning it. The way he nervously glanced over his shoulder, checking for witnesses, before slipping inside. The way he re-emerged minutes later, his face pale, his breathing uneven, his hands shaking. The weight of the evidence settled over the room like a crushing force. Daniel's expression remained frozen, but his shoulders tensed. His breathing became shallow, his eyes flicking toward the screen as if willing it to disappear, to rewind time and erase what had just been revealed. The judge, who had remained quiet throughout the presentation, finally spoke. His voice was calm, yet firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Carter," he said, his gaze piercing, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" A long silence followed. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. His lips parted slightly, as if searching for an explanation, an excuse, something, anything, that could undo what had just been exposed. But nothing came. His lawyer cleared his throat, but even he looked uncertain now, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to resignation. In the jury box, expressions ranged from disbelief to grim understanding. The weight of the truth was evident in their eyes. For so long, Daniel had believed he could manipulate the system, that he could weave a story so intricate, so convincing, that no one would see through it. But now, reality was staring him in the face. The truth had been laid bare for everyone to see, playing in endless, damning loops on the courtroom screen. There was no more debate. No more lies. No more escape. The room was silent, heavy with anticipation. The air felt thick, charged with tension, as if everyone present was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. At the center of it all stood Ethan Carter, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meticulously planning every step, anticipating every possible move. And now, he was ready. Across from him, Victor Steele lounged in his chair, exuding the same arrogant confidence that had allowed him to manipulate, deceive, and destroy those who stood in his way. He smirked, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished wooden table, as if this meeting was nothing more than a formality. To him, Ethan was just another opponent to crush, another obstacle to eliminate. Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Let's end this, shall we?" His voice was calm, steady, revealing nothing of the storm raging inside him. Victor chuckled, a slow, mocking sound. "End it? Carter, you're out of your depth. This game was over before you even stepped onto the board." He leaned back in his chair, his confidence unwavering, his smirk widening. "You just don't realize it yet." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for his briefcase, his fingers brushing over the smooth leather for a brief moment before he unlatched it. The quiet click echoed through the room. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and placed them on the table with deliberate precision. The sound of paper hitting wood was oddly satisfying. Victor's smirk faltered, but only slightly. He glanced at the documents, then back at Ethan. "More theatrics?" he asked, feigning boredom. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Go ahead," he said. "Take a look." Something in his tone made Victor hesitate. The room was so silent that the rustling of paper seemed deafening as he picked up the first page. His eyes moved across the text, scanning the carefully compiled evidence, bank transactions, signed testimonies, hidden correspondences. His fingers tightened around the paper, his jaw clenching as he flipped through the pages faster, his smirk vanishing with each passing second. Ethan watched the shift in Victor's expression, the slow realization, the creeping dread, the barely concealed panic. It was a rare sight, watching a man like Victor Steele lose control. "What is this?" Victor finally growled, his voice low, dangerous. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze sharp, unwavering. "Proof," he said simply. "Proof of every underhanded deal you've made, every law you've broken, every person you've betrayed. Your empire was built on lies, Steele, and I've just pulled the foundation out from under you." Victor slammed the papers down onto the table, his fingers trembling slightly. He looked around the room, seeking support, but the faces surrounding him were no longer filled with blind loyalty. Whispers spread like wildfire. Those who had once stood by his side were now exchanging nervous glances, weighing their options, silently calculating their next move. Victor turned back to Ethan, his mask of control cracking. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered, but there was something hollow in his voice now. Ethan didn't even blink. "I know it does." He turned to the officials seated nearby, addressing them with unwavering confidence. "These documents have been verified. They contain undeniable evidence of fraud, bribery, and corruption. The entire case is airtight. Victor Steele has manipulated and deceived his way to power, but today, the truth speaks louder than his lies." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some faces turned cold, others betrayed signs of fear. Victor's allies, those who had blindly followed him, believing him untouchable, were now slowly backing away, unwilling to sink with a doomed ship. Victor's hands clenched into fists. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a final play, a desperate maneuver. But deep down, he knew. He had lost. "You son of a," he started, voice filled with rage, but before he could finish, the doors burst open. Security officers entered swiftly, their presence final, undeniable. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Steele, you need to come with us." Victor shot up from his seat, knocking over a glass of water. "You can't do this," he snapped. "I built this. I own this." But his words carried no weight anymore. No one was listening. Ethan remained seated, watching as Victor was surrounded. Their eyes met one last time, and in Victor's, Ethan saw fury, desperation, and, most satisfying of all, defeat. "You should have been more careful, Steele," Ethan said quietly. "You underestimated me." Victor gritted his teeth, but he had nothing left to say. As he was escorted out of the room, the once mighty man who had ruled through fear and deception now looked small, powerless. Ethan finally exhaled, the weight of the battle slowly lifting from his shoulders. It had been a long, grueling fight. But in the end, justice had prevailed. The stadium pulsed with raw energy, a living, breathing entity fueled by thousands of screaming fans. Banners waved like restless ocean waves, and the deafening chants of supporters echoed through the massive arena. The championship match had come down to this, one final penalty kick. The entire season, months of grueling training, victories, and heartbreaks, had all led to this single, defining moment. At the center of the field stood Alex Carter, his jersey clinging to his sweat-drenched body, his breath coming in controlled but heavy bursts. His heart pounded like a war drum, but his mind remained sharp. He could hear the voices of his teammates in the distance, some shouting encouragement, others watching in tense silence. Across from him, the opposing goalkeeper, Daniel Hayes, stood like a fortress between the posts, his piercing gaze locked onto Alex. Daniel had built a reputation as an impenetrable wall, a master of psychological warfare. He had already saved 2 penalty kicks in this match alone. His smirk was barely visible beneath his gloves as he clapped them together, taunting Alex. Alex exhaled slowly and placed the ball carefully on the penalty spot. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. He knew that a single misstep could cost his team everything. The referee blew the whistle. The stadium fell into a hushed silence. Alex took a deep breath and ran. His movements were fluid, calculated. He locked eyes with Daniel for a split second before swinging his leg back. As he struck the ball, Daniel lunged to the right, anticipating the shot. But Alex had tricked him. At the very last second, he adjusted his foot, angling the ball in the opposite direction. The crowd gasped as the ball soared through the air, spinning with perfect precision. Time seemed to freeze. The net rippled. Then, goal, A fraction of a second later, the stadium erupted into chaos. Cheers, roars, and screams filled the night sky as the scoreboard flashed the final score, victory, Alex barely had time to register what had happened before his teammates tackled him to the ground, their shouts of celebration ringing in his ears. A wave of relief, joy, and exhaustion washed over him all at once. He had done it. The championship was theirs. And that final, fateful kick? It had just written his name into history. The courtroom was a battlefield, but instead of swords and shields, the weapons were evidence, arguments, and sheer determination. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with anticipation and the weight of what was at stake. Every eye in the room was locked onto the two figures standing at the center of it all, Emily Harper a fearless young attorney, and Victor Steele, a powerful businessman whose empire was built on deception and corruption. For months, Emily had fought tooth and nail to expose the truth. She had spent countless sleepless nights poring over documents, tracking down witnesses, and preparing for every possible counterattack. Victor Steele was not an easy man to take down. He had money, influence, and a legal team that could crush even the most seasoned lawyers. But Emily was different. She wasn't here to lose. Victor leaned back in his chair, exuding the confidence of a man who had evaded justice for far too long. His smug smirk was infuriating, his arrogance radiating through the courtroom. "You have nothing, Ms. Harper," he sneered. "This case is a waste of time." Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she walked to the prosecution table with unwavering composure, picking up a thick file. She turned toward the judge, her voice steady and deliberate. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A, a signed confession from Mr. Steele's personal accountant, detailing every fraudulent transaction he attempted to conceal." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Victor's smirk faltered, just slightly. Emily continued, flipping through the documents with precision. Exhibit B, surveillance footage of Mr. Steele meeting with an offshore banker, attempting to hide illicit funds. Victor's jaw tightened. His lawyer shifted in his seat, clearly uneasy. And finally, Emily said, pausing for effect, her sharp gaze locked onto Victor, Exhibit C, a recorded phone call in which Mr. Steele personally threatens a witness to stay silent. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. For the first time, Victor's confident mask cracked. His fingers twitched. He clenched his jaw, his eyes darting toward his lawyer, searching for a way out. But there was none. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice firm and final. "Given the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds the defendant, guilty, A collective gasp filled the room, followed by whispers, then an eruption of cheers from the victims' families. Emily felt a surge of relief and triumph flood through her. Months of relentless pursuit, of enduring threats and setbacks, had finally paid off. Victor Steele, the man who thought he was untouchable, had just been brought to justice. As she gathered her files, Emily allowed herself a small, victorious smile. This legal battle had been fierce. But she had just won the fight of her career. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered hopes and fading strength. Smoke coiled into the air like the ghosts of fallen warriors, and the distant echoes of gunfire sent chills down the spines of the last remaining soldiers. Captain Ryan Carter wiped the sweat and blood from his brow, his grip tightening around his rifle. His unit was down to its final handful of men, their bodies battered, their spirits barely holding on. Yet none of them had given in to despair. Not yet. The enemy had them surrounded. General Viktor Mikhailov, a ruthless tactician, had anticipated their every move, cutting off their supply lines and forcing them into a desperate retreat. Now, they had only one chance, to strike back, not because victory was assured, but because surrender meant certain death. Ryan crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, his heart pounding against his ribs. He could see his men, exhausted, hollow-eyed, but determined. They had fought too hard to fall without a fight. He inhaled sharply. He had to lead them. He had to give them something to believe in. "Listen up," he called, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This is it. We don't have reinforcements. We don't have an escape route. What we do have is each other, and the enemy thinks we're already beaten." He paused, meeting the eyes of each soldier. "Let's prove them wrong." A tense silence fell over the group. Then, slowly, the men nodded. Fear was there, of course, but something else burned beneath it. Defiance. Then, without hesitation, Ryan gave the signal. A deafening war cry erupted from their throats as they surged forward. Gunfire crackled through the air. The enemy was caught off guard, just for a moment, but it was enough. Ryan moved like a man possessed, his rifle firing in precise bursts, dropping enemy soldiers one by one. His comrades fought beside him, driven by sheer desperation. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered. They were pushing forward. They were fighting back. But then, a sharp crack echoed through the battlefield. Ryan staggered, a searing pain ripping through his side. His vision blurred, his knees nearly buckled, but he forced himself to stay upright. He couldn't fall. Not yet. The battle raged on, but deep down, Ryan knew the truth. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting to be remembered. For years, Brookside District had been nothing more than an afterthought, a place where promises were made but never kept, where crime thrived while the rest of the city turned a blind eye. The people who lived there had learned the hard way that no one was coming to save them. But tonight, they were done waiting. A restless energy pulsed through the streets as the people of Brookside gathered. Maria Lopez, a single mother who had called this neighborhood home her entire life, stood at the front of the crowd. Hundreds of residents stood beside her, workers, students, elders, people who had struggled, who had lost, who had endured. They carried signs demanding justice. They held each other up, bound by a shared fury, a shared pain. At the other end of the street, a line of uniformed officers blocked their path, shields up, batons ready. The city had sent them, hoping to silence the voices of Brookside before the rest of the world could hear them. Maria felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a politician. She was just a mother, just a woman who had watched too many families lose their homes, too many children grow up believing their dreams didn't matter. But right now, standing in front of her people, she realized something. She didn't need to be a leader. She just needed to speak the truth. "We are not criminals," she said, her voice ringing out over the tense silence. "We are families. We are workers. We are the people who built this city, who keep it running every single day. And we will not be ignored anymore." A murmur ran through the crowd. Then, one voice called out in support. Another joined in. And then, a chant rose, a tidal wave of voices crashing against the night. The officers did not move. But neither did the people. Maria stood firm, her heart pounding. This was no longer just a protest. This was a revolution. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, an almost suffocating weight pressing down on everyone present. The only sound was the distant ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching endlessly. Every person in the room, lawyers, jurors, spectators, held their breath, waiting for the moment that would change everything. Ethan Carter, the defense attorney, sat rigid at his table, his fingers lightly tapping against the polished wood. He had spent months preparing for this trial, tirelessly going through every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every legal precedent that could make a difference. And yet, despite his confidence in the truth, a knot of anxiety twisted in his stomach. Across from him, District Attorney William Harris sat with an air of quiet confidence, his sharp eyes fixed on the jury box. To him, this case had always been an easy win, solid evidence, reliable witnesses, and a strong narrative that pointed to one inevitable conclusion: Michael Reeves, Ethan's client, was guilty. But Ethan had fought. He had stood before the jury and laid out every inconsistency, exposed every flaw in the prosecution's argument, and brought forth the truth buried beneath assumptions and bias. Now, the jury had reached their decision. The judge, a stern man with piercing gray eyes, leaned forward slightly. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of finality. Has the jury reached a verdict? A hush fell over the courtroom. The jury foreman, an older gentleman with an unreadable expression, stood up, a folded piece of paper clutched in his hands. We have, Your Honor. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He stole a glance at Michael, who sat beside him, hands clasped together tightly. His face was pale, his eyes darkened with exhaustion and fear. A man who had spent weeks, months, living under the crushing weight of an accusation that could steal his entire future. The foreman cleared his throat and unfolded the paper. We find the defendant. The pause was unbearable. Not guilty. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, chaos. A cry of relief burst from Michael's wife, who immediately buried her face in her hands, overcome with emotion. A murmur rippled through the spectators, some gasping, others whispering in disbelief. Ethan let out a slow breath, feeling his entire body loosen from the tension that had held it captive for so long. He clenched his fists beneath the table, a wave of satisfaction washing over him. Michael exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath for days. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembling slightly as he turned to Ethan. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You saved my life. Ethan met his gaze, a small but firm smile forming on his lips. No, he said quietly. The truth saved your life. On the other side of the courtroom, William Harris's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. He had lost, and though he kept his composure, Ethan could see the frustration in his eyes. The judge's gavel struck the wood, bringing order to the room. Court is adjourned. As people began to rise, Michael turned to embrace his wife, who clung to him as if afraid he might disappear. The sight stirred something deep within Ethan, a reminder of why he did this, why he fought. Justice had prevailed today. And nothing felt better than that. The stadium was alive with energy, a sea of roaring voices, flashing lights, and restless anticipation. Tens of thousands of fans filled the stands, their chants shaking the very foundation beneath them. The atmosphere crackled with intensity, one last battle, one last chance for victory. Alex Donovan, captain of the national team, stood in the center of the field, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sweat dripped down his face, his muscles ached, and exhaustion clawed at his body, but none of it mattered. They were behind by a single goal. Time was slipping away. He could hear the coach shouting from the sidelines, his teammates calling out to each other, but all Alex could focus on was the ticking of the clock, each second pulling them closer to defeat. Not yet. Not if he had anything to say about it. The referee's whistle blew, and the game was back in motion. The ball was in play, passed swiftly between teammates as they fought to break through the opposing defense. The other team was relentless, blocking every attempt, anticipating every move. Alex moved like a predator, eyes scanning the field, searching for an opening. His lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest, but he pushed forward. Then, in a flash, his teammate, Daniel Carter, spotted him and sent a perfect pass soaring toward him. This was it. Alex sprinted, cutting through defenders with sheer determination, the roar of the crowd fading into nothing but white noise. The goal was within reach. The opposing goalkeeper tensed, ready to dive in any direction. One chance. One shot. Alex planted his foot and struck the ball with everything he had. Time seemed to slow as the ball soared through the air, curving past the outstretched hands of the goalkeeper. And then, the net rippled. A heartbeat of silence. Then, the world exploded. The stadium erupted into sheer pandemonium. Fans screamed, people leaped from their seats, the entire place trembling under the force of their celebration. Alex barely registered it before his teammates tackled him, pulling him into a euphoric embrace. Arms wrapped around him, voices shouting in his ears, but all he could do was stare at the scoreboard. They had equalized. There were only seconds left on the clock. The referee signaled for extra time. The battle wasn't over yet, but momentum was on their side. As he pulled himself to his feet, Alex met the eyes of his teammates, seeing the same fire burning in their expressions. They had fought too hard to stop now. Victory was within their grasp. And they were ready to seize it.